Hey everybody, this is John for MTG Nexus coming at you with another quick deck overview, this time with the Mhyashi special Mono Red Midrange. If you like these informative deck overviews, please consider subscribing to the channel, giving us a thumbs up, leaving a constructive comment down below. Hope you had a Merry Christmas, and I hope you have a very good start to your 2023. So Mono Red Midrange is a deck that has largely been popularized primarily on the back of work from Mhyashi, known for his inventive brews, primarily of the monocolor variants. It's a deck that is kind of an amalgamation of really three different decks in terms of the tools that are used to construct it. You have the old Spread Red decks, which were built around Koth of the Hammer, which you see in this particular build, along with snow-covered lands and the card Scred, which basically did a damage for each snow permanent you controlled, and then use things like scrying sheets to get some type of arbitrary advantage, and then use things like Blood Moon and random things like Wormcoil Engines, Glory Bringers, P and Kiernalar, etc. to kind of get ahead in what the game was doing, and was primarily a mono red control deck with a little bit of Blood Moon to cheese your opponent out. And then you have Mono Red Prison, which is a more all-in combo deck. A deck that's kind of faded a little bit in terms of its execution. Used to use things like Desperate Ritual or Seething Song or any of these various different ritual effects that have been Pyretic Ritual, I guess is the other one that's technically legal right now, to get out fast Blood Moons and Chalices to lock your opponent out, using things like Ensnaring Bridge, and then using some type of Planeswalkers, whether it be Chandra, Koth, or some other effect to win the game. And then finally, you have the Mono Red Prowess deck that was popular for some time after the printing of things like Soulscar Mage, etc. When Prowess was in kind of its heyday, would use things like Soulscar Mage, Monastery Swift Spear, Manamorphose, things like Kiln Fiend, etc. I do believe that the original variants of Mono Red Midrange did actually kind of evolve from there. And now they're just kind of this eclectic mix of various brews, mainly built around the card Blood Moon or some other way to punish your opponent's mana base. The first one here is an interesting thing. It's kind of an amalgamation of everything. While it is not a Blood Moon deck, it is an Urza Saga deck. That end has its own package, but you're going to see a lot of the same overlapping cards. Ragavan, Bone Crusher Giant. Ragavan, obviously early pressure, helps to get the mana rolling. One of the key cards that these decks historically missed was a way to accelerate early, and Ragavan certainly fills that role. Bone Crusher Giant, multimodal, can kill small creatures, can be a threat on its own. Able to Mirror Breaker, slices it, dices, it kind of holds these red mid-range decks together. Koth of the Hammer, kind of not the most powerful Planeswalker in the world, but its -2 can give you a whole dump load of mana, and then you can play a bunch of stuff out, and then its emblem can be definitely game-winning if you're running enough copies of Mountains. Fury, obviously a newer addition to the decks, solves some problems, allows you to have a little bit more early interaction, not getting run over. One of the problems the old Spread Red decks would have is if your opponent got past a certain point or you didn't have enough bolts or something, you needed to run like sweepers like Anger of the Gods or some effect Pyroclasm like that. Fury kind of fits into a nice build, and that's a threat and can kind of wipe your opponent's board of smaller creatures. Another Modern Horizons All-Star, Seasoned Pyromancer, helps with the Fable of the Mirror Breaker with a wrong half problem, puts bodies on the board, etc., which kind of contributes to the whole mid-range grindy plan this deck has. This deck version is running Cleansing Wildfire as both a way to attack your opponent's mana base if you're using things like Tron and such, but also a way to potentially get free lands and cantrip with Darksteel Citadel. You can target your own land, blow it up, and since it's indestructible, you just get another basic land, and you get to draw a card for your trouble. Urza Saga, we've already kind of talked about. It's various different pieces, a Soul Guide Lantern for any type of graveyard nonsense or good against Murktide to slow them down. Shadow Spear when you find yourself in racing situations, especially against decks like Burn and such. Pirate Spellbomb when you just need to kill stuff. Kind of a shock on a stick, can also be a cantrip. And Mishra's Research Desk is a way to draw some cards as well. Unholy Heat is interesting. It's kind of shock with upside. You have the potential to get Delirium, as you do have quite a bit of different card types in this deck, but oftentimes it's a shock that does have upside in the mid to late game. And then Shatter Skull Smashing is a multi-modal facing card. It can either be a land that can deal you 3 damage, or could be kind of a divide to kill a couple things in the mid to late game. And then, obviously, playing a boatload of mountains, especially if you're playing Koth of the Hammer. The sideboard, Alpine Moon, Tron, other Urza Saga decks, etc. Shattering Spree for any type of artifact nonsense, Urza Saga decks, Hammer Time, etc. Relic of Progenitus when you need a little bit more graveyard hate, that's Soulbound Lantern. Pithing Needle when you need to shut down problematic permanents, especially opponents' Planeswalkers. Voidmere, very good against the various Cascade decks, whether it be Glimpse, Living End, or Rhinos. Ratchet Bomb gives you an answer to a bunch of Rhinos, Urza Saga constructs, or ways to clear out things from creativity before they can target them. Abrade, just multi-modal card that can either be used as a lightning bolt to creatures or as a shatter effect. And then Obsidian Charmaw, just as ways to attack opponents' land bases, whether they be a greedy land base such as 4 or 5 color Omnath, or a way to attack Tron as you really are a little bit of a slow deck and you need a way to slow them down. Kozilek, probably here for mill. Alright, taking a look at a completely different variant, an Obosh the Prey Piercer, which means you're limited to odd number of spells. This one's running a Flame Slash and Lightning Bolt, and Spikefield Hazard as ways to interact with your opponent's early creatures. Ragavan to get in there a little bit early and accelerate your 3-drops. Relic to slow down the graveyard nonsense. Blood Moon and Megas of the Moon to mess with your opponent's mana. Phoenix of Ash is an interesting one of, just as a flying kind of recursive threat. Seasoned Pyromancer as an interesting way to dig through cards, along with Fable. This one's much more all in on the getting rid of extra cards, like extra copies of Blood Moon, etc. And then Furies clears the way. It's a threat. Why not, right? Land base. Blast Zone is an interesting land that allows you to have a little bit of interaction in your mana base. Not the best on the early game, but can clear out a bunch of 1-drops, especially things like Hammer Time, Burn, etc. Den of the Bugbear, way to pressure your opponent along with Mutavault. Rain-and-Up Ruins can threaten to deal damage to your opponent's life total. Sekenzan, nice utility land. Basically, get to pack in all the utility lands into one neat pile. And then Shinka, I'm not even sure what this one does. Target legendary creature gains first strike. Relevant as both Ragavan and the Fable token, I do believe. No, just the reflection of Kiki-Jiki. Sideboard. What a mix. Chalice of the Void. Primarily here for Cascade, obviously, as you do play a boatload of 1-drops. Potentially bring it in against 2-drops, but this is primarily here for Cascade and 0 mana nonsense. Brother's End. Sweeper for both smaller creatures and for artifact decks like Urza Saga Piles, Hammer Time, etc. 6 copy of Moon Effects, because why not? Ratchet Bomb helps clean up tokens, especially Urza Saga variety, or tokens your opponents might have laying around for creativity. Lantern of the Lost. Enters battlefield, exile target card from the graveyard. Exile Lantern Lost, exile all cards from all graveyards, then draw a card. Kind of a slower version of Relic of Progenitus. And then Shattering Spree when you need even more artifact hate. Alright, lots of the same stuff. The only interesting one with this build, Karn's Silex. Players can't pay life or cast spells or activated abilities. Players can't pay life to cast spells or to activate abilities that aren't mana abilities. No fetchies. And then obviously you play X, exile Karn's Silex, destroy your channel and permanent mana value X or Lice. Activate only as a sorcery. This, along with Blast Zone, basically covers you against most of the field from being too fast for you, as if you're not already playing enough with Flame Slashes and Lightning Bolts. Experimental Synthesizer, nice kind of grindy card when you don't want to play a bunch of Fables with your Seasoned Pyromancers. It's a little bit slower, but you can divide it up over a couple of turns. And then, obviously, land base, we've already kind of talked about the utility you get with playing these monocolor mana bases, not playing a bunch of fetch lands. Sideboard. Flame Blitz. Beginning of the Grand Step. Flame Blitz deals 5 damage to each Planeswalker. Great way to deal with your bunch of your opponent's run-in sixes, Teferis, etc. laying around. Shattering Spree, something's got to deal with those Urza Saga decks. Pirate Spellbomb, primarily here for answers for anti-mono red tech. So, you know, your core Firewalkers, your Sanctifier and Vex, your, I'm seeing it, but I can never remember what it is. The 1 mana, sack it to prevent damage from a red source, etc. Pithing Needle, when you just need to shut down annoying Planeswalkers. Magus of the Moon, when you need to go full tilt Blood Moon. Dismember, when you need to get another removal spell. And then obviously Obosh. Good reason to be playing at this 1, 3, 5. And then obviously basically deals double the damage of your odd mana sources. And since all your things are odd, other than maybe your tokens off of Seasoned Pyro, pretty good companion to have access to. This one's a little bit more unique. This is a slightly more aggressive take. I believe this is largely based off of the work of Aspiring Spike had a build that was doing something similar. Basically, you're trying to leverage your artifacts with a Shrapnel Blast and Galvanic Blast to deal a bunch of damage with cheap spells. Obviously, Experimental Synthesizer fits into this nicely, along with Ragavan, Voldaren Epicure, Bomat Courier, etc. Then you obviously have access to Pirate Spellbomb. This is more of like an artifact mid-range burn deck, for lack of a better term. It's different than traditional burn, but still tries to execute a lot of the same plan. Has a little bit more reach card per card, and the card quality is a little bit weaker overall in terms of like the 1-drops and such, but still it's an interesting take on Mono Red Midrange. You still having the Seasoned Pyromancers and Furies in the sideboard, and then still having access to the very nice mana base. Obviously, you could run something more in your lands if you wanted to do Den of the Bugbear and stuff to pressure your opponent a little bit more. But, you know, an interesting twist. It goes a little bit more aggressive. Sideboard, we've already kind of covered most of the stuff. Flame Blitz, Planeswalkers, Magus, Chalice, etc. It's really kind of hard to get a beat on what these decks are specifically targeted towards. Obviously, a lot of these are Blood Moon based decks, which means they tend to be very good against attacking aggressive mana bases such as Omnath Piles, Creativity, etc. You know, very good against Tron. Well, not very good against Tron, but okay against Tron, backing up your pressure with Blood Moons. This is a deck that very much tries to grind. It's not a Prowess deck. It's not really a Prison deck. It's just kind of a mid-range pile. You know, its weaknesses, it can be gone over the top of if given enough time. You know, decks like Tron, Amulet can be a problem if they can deal with your Blood Moons. It doesn't, decks that just don't care what it's doing. Hence why you're seeing a lot of like anti-graveyard stuff. You're seeing a lot of Chalices and stuff. You know, the Cascade deck certainly could give this deck fits. Especially things like Living End, Rhinos, etc. Just kind of outclass what this deck is doing. But this deck really leverages, a lot of the variants of this deck really leverage Blood Moon, and, you know, they just keep churning cards. This deck almost, especially the Obosh versions that we were looking at, these decks almost never run out of cards, because between Seasoned Pyromancers and Experimental Synthesizers, Fables of the Mirror Breaker, and Ragavan hits, and everything else, these decks see cards. It's an interesting style of play. Obviously, like I said, it's kind of an amalgamation of like 3 different decks that have kind of amalgamized into this mid-range pile that can do well. I've certainly been... Mhyashi has definitely pounded me into the ground numerous times when I was playing Burn with this deck or variants of it. So it's definitely an interesting take on Go Big Red. Doesn't go too big, but in a format like Modern, you really can't play a traditional over-the-top like 4, 5, 6 mana drop mid-range decks. You have to play a little bit earlier to the battlefield, put pressure on your opponent, or do something devastating early like a Blood Moon, and this deck can certainly fit that bill. So, if you like these style decks, don't forget to like, comment, subscribe. Let us know what deck overviews you might like us to see next. And Friday's video should be the top 5 decks in Modern going into 2023.